Are Jewish people the only people being marginalized or persecuted? Why was there no other group mentioned here? You know what I mean? Am I missing something there? 4th of July, the red, white, and the blue, 250 years. Have you heard of the Religious Liberty Commission, RLC, established by President Donald Trump via Executive Order 14291 on May 1st, 2025? Well, if you watch the entirety of this video, you will learn what the Religious Liberty Commission is and how it relates to the image of the beast. You heard me correctly. That is the image of the beast spoken about in Revelation chapter 13. There has been controversy surrounding the RLC. The commission's makeup and ideological focuses have drawn sharp criticisms to the point of legal pushback. In February 2026, a multi-faith coalition sued the administration. While the executive order originally designated July 4th, 2026 as the termination date, the administration has allowed the timeline to extend beyond that date. The Religious Liberty Commission, known as the RLC, is a federal advisory body. It operates directly under the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice. The RLC is structured to examine domestic religious expression. It provides policy advice directly to two highly influential arms of the executive branch. Those are the White House Faith Office and the Domestic Policy Council. It is not merely a symbolic panel designed to offer vague platitudes about faith. It is an organized, legally backed advisory body, and is tasked with redesigning the intersections of church and state in America. What is its supposed purpose? The official mandate of the RLC is to study the history and current state of religious freedom in the United States. It then advises the executive branch. According to its founding documents, its primary objectives include evaluating the historical foundations and societal impact of religious liberty, identifying what the administration considers current threats to domestic religious liberty, developing legal and policy strategies to protect religious practices and institutions, and recommend programs to promote public awareness of religious expression. Sounds good, right? When we look at the specific areas of focus, the commission concentrates heavily on the First Amendment rights of pastors, faith-based institutions, teachers, and students. This includes studying conscience protections in healthcare, challenges to vaccines mandates, and the authority of parents to choose religious education. Sounds good, right? But as we observe this focus, an unavoidable question arises. Does this mandate protect all religions equally? Or is it heavily weighted toward a specific subset of Christianity? To understand the legal battleground here, we must look at the first of the 5 freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The Establishment Clause stops the government from establishing a national religion, which is why, my Christian brothers and sisters, the term/phrase Christian nationalism is concerning to a lot of the general public, even other Christians like myself. So let's not play dumb. And then there is the Free Exercise Clause. Protects an individual's right to practice any religion or no religion without government interference. However, there is a vital scope and limitation to the First Amendment that is often misunderstood in public discourse. The First Amendment protects citizens only from government interference. It does not prevent private business, private employers, or social media platforms from enforcing their own rules. It does not stop them from terminating employment or certain speech or religious expressions. This limitation is precisely where the RLC seeks to intervene. They're attempting to push the boundaries of government protection into areas previously considered private or institutional domain. So who's a part of the RLC and why is that important? The true nature and ideological direction of any commission are revealed by the people who occupy its seats. The RLC can have up to 14 members appointed by the president. This sits alongside the ex officio government members, such as the Attorney General, and several specialized advisory boards. At the top sits President Donald Trump himself. He was raised Presbyterian, but he stated in 2020 that he now identifies as non-denominational Christian. Many of us question his Christianity at all, but nevertheless, this panel consists almost entirely of prominent conservative Christian leaders, as you will see. The chairman is Dan Patrick. He is the lieutenant governor of Texas. He is an evangelical Christian and Baptist who attends the Second Baptist Church in Houston. Patrick frequently and publicly states that he is a Christian first, a conservative second, and a Republican third. The vice chairman is Dr. Ben Carson. He is the former HUD secretary. Dr. Carson is a lifelong active member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Pastor Franklin Graham, he is the CEO of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. He is an evangelical Christian minister and leading figure within the Southern Baptist tradition. Cardinal Timothy Dolan, the Archbishop of New York, he is a prominent leader within the Roman Catholic Church, obviously. Bishop Robert Barron, the founder of Word on Fire Catholic Ministries. He is the Roman Catholic Bishop of the Diocese of Winona, Rochester in Minnesota. Pastor Paula White Kane, the head of the White House Faith Office, is a prominent non-denominational evangelical and Pentecostal pastor. She is often associated with the charismatic tradition in the false prosperity gospel movement. She has been a spiritual advisor to Trump since the early days of his political office or political career. Lord help us. Lord help us. Allison Ho, she is a high-profile conservative appellate attorney and an evangelical Christian. She actively works with faith-based legal organizations like the First Liberty Institute. Ryan T. Anderson, the president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, he is a Roman Catholic. His public policy work and academic writings heavily reflect traditional Catholic social teachings and natural law theology. Looks like Catholics and Protestants are working together just as foretold in Revelation chapter 13. Dr. Phil McGraw, Dr. Phil, the famous author and television host, he was raised in the Baptist Church. Dr. Phil has publicly discussed his personal Christian faith and his choice to accept Christ at a young age. Eric Metaxas, an evangelical Christian author and conservative radio host, he holds a Greek Orthodox heritage, but operates as a prominent cultural commentator. And Rabbi Meir Soloveichik, an Orthodox Jewish leader, he is the senior rabbi of Congregation Shearith Israel in New York City. He is notable for being the sole non-Christian commissioner on the entire panel. I didn't put the team together, friends. I'm just reporting on the team. Look closely at this lineup, friends. The overwhelming majority represents a specific theological and political alignment. This distinct composition forms the very core of the controversy surrounding the commission itself. So what has it done to date? Since its formation in May 2025, the RLC has traveled across the United States. It has conducted a series of 7 public hearings. During these events, the commission gathered testimony from more than 100 witnesses. They detailed alleged infringements on their religious practices in workplaces, schools, and public institutions. On June 26, 2026, the commission formally released a comprehensive 224-page draft report. It details their findings and a series of sweeping proposed reforms. This report is not just a collection of observations. It is a blueprint for transforming public policy. Before I list some of the key recommendations inside the draft, let me play a clip when the RLC presented this document to President Trump.
And I'd like to start off with the chairman, Dan Patrick.
Yes, sir. First of all, Mr. President, thank you for hosting us today, and thank you for establishing this commission. It was just 13 months ago when we stood in the Rose Garden. Now it's an incredibly beautiful Rose Garden today. We stood there and we talked about religious liberty and that no president in our history has stood more for God than this president. He has been unashamed to speak the word of Jesus. He's been unashamed to speak up for all faiths. And he established this commission so that we would assure Americans that religious liberty, that this great inheritance from our founding fathers, would continue for another 250 years. And Mr. President, we believe this will be one of your greatest legacies, and you happen to be the perfect president to be here in the 250th celebration. The question is, what is religious liberty? It's our conscience. It's that little voice inside of us that tells us right from wrong. It's that voice that when we're in trouble, we can talk to in our quiet moments. It's that voice when we feel unloved and alone that can comfort us through a higher power. When governments can take away your religious liberty, they're putting their hand in your heart and taking everything you believe in. And if governments can do that, then they become God. The president spoke earlier today of the communist threat in this country. We know what communists do around the world. They remove God. They close the churches. They punish the believers. And so this is so important at this point in time in history. And we didn't know about this communist movement a year ago when we were here. But this is the perfect time to stand up and say to America, you have been given this great inheritance and you deserve to have religious liberty. The key is that after 103 witnesses, after 7 months of testimony, after 200 pages of testimony that we're delivering today, we found there was one constant theme. The overwhelming majority of our witnesses said that they were attacked and punished, and what was used against them was one phrase that's not in the Constitution, and that phrase is separation of church and state. The left has used that one phrase that was one line out of one of hundreds of letters by Thomas Jefferson to batter and hammer people of faith for the last 70 to 80 years. And this report will speak very clearly that we want to be sure Americans understand that they cannot be attacked by that phrase any longer. So we have 12 recommendations. I'll read the first 6. My great Vice Chairman will read the next 6, and then members will speak to these issues.
Now, here's what's interesting. Wouldn't it be ironic that the very commission, the very government, the very set of Christians that are fighting hard for religious freedom would end up being the power, the country, the people to actually remove religious freedom, to actually restrain religious freedom in an effort to maintain it? A lot of what he said here, I think is right. We don't want government telling us that we can't worship God and so forth and so on. Whether you agree or not with his perspective on the role of President Donald Trump, I do believe this has probably been the most aggressive entrance of Christian nationalism in our country under his administration. Hands down, I think no one would argue against that. What it sounded like to me as I listened, since the separation of church and state was being mentioned in the persecution of Christians as perceived, it seems to be like, well, we need to kind of tear down that separation of church and state because those exact words are not found in the Constitution. Therefore, you can't use that phrase. And if you do, then you're a liberal. I'm a Christian, friends, and I want the church and the state to be separate. I expect my government to uphold morality, but for them to allow me to have the freedom of religion and conscience to worship my God. So what does that look like practically? I expect my government to enforce the last 6 commandments of the 10 commandments, but to leave alone the first 4 commandments of the 10 commandments. And there's always this fear with evangelicals about communism. They fear that communism is going to take over. So to be fair, as Christians in the United States, we are faced with Islamic pressures. We are faced with communistic pressures. We are faced with sexual immorality pressures, normalizing sin. These things are true, not imagined. There's war all around the world, wars and rumors of wars, just like Jesus prophesied. And definitely other people, other nations, ethnicities, countries are vying and fighting for and desirous to conquer the United States. But the question is, how are we going to fight back? Did we see, as Christians, did we see Jesus using government to defend or expand his kingdom? And the answer is no, friend. But let us continue.
So, Mr. President, recommendation number 1, instruct the Department of Justice to issue guidance clarifying the proper understanding of the Establishment Clause and the separation of church and state. Number 2, the Department of Justice, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission shall issue Know Your Rights posters for students, parents, public teachers, administrators, religious leaders, religious institutions, healthcare workers, and military service members. Ben Carson, I'll let you finish with the remaining 7?
6.
6, go ahead.
Combat anti-Semitism through enforcement of civil rights laws, litigation of credible allegations of anti-Semitic discrimination and violence, and civic education. Protect religious Americans from government-led litigation targeting their free exercise. Repeal the Johnson Amendment. Order the Department of War to streamline and improve the religious accommodation process. Continue efforts to restore the retirement or re-enlistment eligibility of service members who lost employment, health insurance, pensions, and other benefits because of their religious beliefs about COVID and vaccines. And lastly, honor the courage of religious liberty heroes through creating a Presidential Medal of Religious Liberty and First Freedom Hero Awards to recognize Americans who stand up for religious freedom and play an indispensable role in protecting citizens' constitutional rights.
Mr. President, could I just say one last thing?
Before Dan Patrick says his last statement here that I want you to hear, very important, in regards to separation of church and state, I want to bring out two things. Are Jewish people the only people being marginalized or persecuted? Why was there no other group mentioned here? You know what I mean? Am I missing something there? But that falls in line with Zionism. That falls in line with an evangelical mindset that believes that the literal nation of Israel overseas and here, a home and abroad, need to be protected and uplifted, and because they're God's chosen people, and that's saturated in this body, in this group, in this advisory body, for sure, without question. I think there are a lot of things here that a lot of Christian Americans are going to agree with and side with, but there's a caution here, there's a warning. So stick with me to the end, because when we get to the image of the beast, it'll make more sense, and maybe by God's grace you can see the danger that is right in front of us.
On the issue of church and state, that was used as a hammer against almost all of our witnesses. One of the important recommendations that we made, if that happens in the future, if any superior person in the military, a superintendent of the school district, someone in the healthcare system, whoever uses that against someone who is simply standing up for their religious liberty or simply praying in public, that within a short amount of time, if they allege separation of church and state, that public official must in writing explain how that person has violated the Constitution. Because, again, the separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. And from this day forward, if anyone says that to you and they're in public office or serve in any agency in any official capacity, they have to point out exactly where you have violated the Constitution, because you have not. And from this day forward, that phrase should have no power over people of all faiths ever again in America.
How are the findings of this committee?
Wow. Let me say this. While the phrase separation of church and state is not present in the Constitution, the principle, the concept is derived from the Establishment Clause. So, this becomes a thing of interpretation and application, right? We have a real dark history behind us when it comes to religious freedom or religious persecution. The very reason why Europeans fled to the United States of America to even have a 250th year anniversary is because they were being persecuted religiously overseas. I feel as though North American evangelicals are not knowledgeable of this, they've forgotten it, or they just don't care. And as long as their religion is on top, they're willing to persecute anyone beneath them. Now, again, I realize and recognize that there are threats to religious freedom. There are threats to religion, but that's how it's always been for Christians. There has not been a generation where the truth was not persecuted, trampled on, suppressed, attacked, mocked, ridiculed. No? So just so we're clear, the recommendations inside the draft include reinterpreting church and state. The report explicitly challenges long-held legal interpretations of the separation of church and state. It advocates instead for building bridges between government institutions and faith communities, public education and funding. The commission recommends a robust federal role in expanding religious instruction and religious displays within public schools. It also advocates for protecting federal funding for faith-based organizations. This would apply without forcing them to alter their religious identities or hiring practices to meet federal non-discrimination standards, reporting mechanisms. The draft proposes the creation of federal hotlines and online portals to report violations for religious freedoms, and a sweeping Know Your Rights campaign. This would primarily be for students, teachers, and healthcare workers to directly report religious liberty violations to the Department of Justice. Not to mention, the document goes into repealing political restrictions. The report calls for the total elimination of the Johnson Amendment. That is a 1954 tax code provision. It prohibits tax-exempt religious organizations and churches from participating in political campaigns or endorsing political candidates. So evangelicals want to be able to influence politics with money in their religion. They want to receive the tax benefits, the tax breaks, but from their perspective, not be penalized by not being able to influence politics. That's church and state coming together, or at least making the mechanism possible where the church can bear more influence over politics. What would Jesus do, friends? Would Jesus do this? I want all my Christian brothers and sisters to ask yourself this question. Would Jesus do this? Did we see Jesus do this? Is it recorded that Jesus did this? What did he go to Herod for? What did he go to Rome for at all? He said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar, render unto God what is God's. The document also advocates for conscience exemptions. The RLC advocates for broad, legally protected exemptions for individuals and private businesses. This would apply to those objecting to federal or state policies regarding vaccine mandates, pronoun usage, or specific public school classroom curricula. I get it, friends. I get it, my brothers and sisters. I'm tracking. But we're on dangerous ground. We're on Revelation 13 ground. So just to be clear, what power does this group actually have? I don't want to exaggerate and blow something out of proportion. So let's just cover what power this group actually has. When assessing the threat or the impact of any government entity, we must look at its actual legal authority. The short answer for this is the RLC has no direct legislative or enforcement power. Because it is established as a federal advisory committee, the RLC cannot pass laws, it cannot issue legally binding regulations or dictate judicial rulings. Its legal authority is strictly advisory and investigative. Its primary mechanism of influence is the final report it delivers to the president, which happened. However, while they might not have that legal ability and power, it would be a profound mistake to dismiss the commission as powerless. Any actual policy changes stemming from the commission's work can be rapidly executed. This can happen through separate executive orders issued by the president. It can happen through new rule-making processes by federal agencies, such as the Department of Justice or the Department of Education, or it can happen through targeted acts of Congress. The RLC provides the intellectual framework and the administrative justification. The president and the cabinet provide the enforcement muscle. So real quick, I just want to talk about the controversies and the legal challenges and what's kind of happened here. This aggressive push to reconstruct American secularism has triggered intense legal and social friction. The coalition I mentioned earlier that sued the administration included the Interfaith Alliance. Muslims for Progressive Values and Hindus for Human Rights were a part of this group. The lawsuit alleges that the RLC directly violates the Federal Advisory Committee Act. The FACA is a federal law that strictly requires government advisory panels to be fairly balanced in viewpoint and representation, which obviously this advisory board is not. Critics and plaintiffs argue that a federal panel composed of 12 Christians and only one Jewish representative completely excludes the voices, perspectives, and constitutional protections of millions of Americans. These include Muslims, Hindus, Sheiks, Buddhists, and non-religious citizens. They argue that the RLC is not protecting all religious liberty. Instead, they claim it establishes a mechanism of Christian nationalism. Who would have thought? Furthermore, historical organizations like the American Historical Association have openly challenged the draft report. They accuse the commission of weaponizing a highly selective revised narrative of American history. They claim this is used to systematically dismantle decades of established judicial interpretations of the Establishment Clause. We're going to war over the understanding and definition and application of church and state, friends, or the separation thereof. Even within the commission themselves, there's been some friction manifested. Someone was terminated, and I'll spare you all the detail. But the administration has refused to allow the work to slow down. So now on to the prophetic connection. To the untrained prophetic eye, the establishment of the RLC, the rhetoric of Dan Patrick, and the administrative power of the Domestic Policy Council looks like a standard political shift. But when we place these exact current events under the lens of Bible prophecy, an alarming and precise picture emerges. The symbols of Revelation chapter 13 outline the final crisis of human history. To understand how the RLC connects to this prophecy, we must first break down the two symbolic entities that pave the way for the end-time deception. First, the sea beast. Revelation 13 verses 1 through 10 describe a beast rising up out of the sea. This religio-political power is the Roman Catholic papacy. We're speaking about the system itself. That is no condemnation on every Catholic. God has children in all churches all over the world, especially in Babylon as a whole, that he is calling out to be a part of his flock. But this system represents a religious power that gained control of secular civil government power during the Middle Ages and unalived God's people. It used the sword of the state to enforce its religious dogmas, mandated its forms of worship, and ruthlessly punished dissenters and religious minorities. These citizens were termed heretics. It was a total amalgamation of church and state power. It was a system where spiritual decrees carried civil penalties. It is Rome's boast that she never changes. Imagine if she was given that same power today. The second beast, the earth beast. It has two horns like a lamb, Christ-like, Christian-like. These symbolize youth, gentleness, and purity. No crowns. They represent the foundational principles of civil and religious liberty. A church with no pope, a state with no king, Protestantism, and republican government. This power is none other than the United States of America being led by apostate Christianity, friends. It arose relatively peacefully in a relatively unpopulated area in contrast to the other world empires that we find in the book of Daniel. This truth is symbolized in part by being seen arising out of the earth and not out of the sea, which represents peoples, multitudes, tongues, and nations. It established a constitution that guaranteed that government could never restrict the free exercise of faith or establish a state religion. However, the prophecy contains a chilling warning. This beast with lamb-like horns speaks, legislates as a dragon. From the blue laws in the colony of Virginia in 1610 that came with a death penalty, to officially institutionalizing slavery within the text of the U.S. Constitution by way of the 3/5 Compromise, this nation will in the future abandon its founding principles altogether. It will repudiate every principle of its Constitution as a Protestant and Republican government, and it will begin to exercise all the coercive power of the first beast before it by setting the church over the state and thus making the image to the beast. But the Bible tells us who gets the victory over the beast: his image, his name, his number, and the mark of his name. It is those who keep all the commandments of God. All 10, friends, not 9, not 7, not picking and choosing. The remnant church of God who gets the victory over the beast and over Satan are those who keep the commandments of God, have the testimony of Jesus Christ, which is the spirit of prophecy, and have the faith of Jesus. Friend, it is my hope that you will choose to take your stand on the side with God's commandment-keeping people here at the end of time. May God help us. Maranatha, are you ready? Peace. I'm out. I'll catch you in the next one.
I'm dwelling in the secret place of the Most High God above.